Hey friends, welcome back. If this is your first time visiting the channel, glad to have you. For this video, I'll be giving you my impressions on the Jotunheim 2, Asgard 3, and LYR3 headphone amplifiers. This video is made possible with the support of Headphones.com, the home of the 365-day return policy. For my impressions, I'll be listening to the headphone amplifiers paired with the Matrix Audio Element M, the Modi 3, and the internal multi-bit inside the Jotunheim. No one has compensated me for my opinions, and all thoughts and impressions are my own. I will utilize many of the headphones in my collection or some of the headphones that I have in for review to search for synergies with the different amps so I can give you my subjective thoughts on which pairings and amps I like best. I'll cover four main topics: build quality, specifications, design, and sound quality. Then I will give my overall conclusions and leave my affiliate links in the video description to some of the gear discussed. Starting with the LYR3, the unit is built solid with a visually appealing chassis that is equally durable and well thought out. The LYR3 uses one 6SN7 tube and the coherence hybrid topology. According to the manufacturer, this topology is a unique current mode non-inverting tube BJT hybrid topology that eliminates the need for interstage coupling capacitors. The LYR3 was also the first amp to introduce continuity, a constant transconductance output stage, which you can read more about from the links in the video description. When purchasing the LYR3, you can choose to have an internal DAC, either a multi-bit or AK4490. If you already have a DAC you enjoy, however, you can opt for a phono input with a 42 dB gain, or simply just don't add anything and leave the space open for future upgrades. The LYR3 uses a single 1/4 inch headphone output and has a high gain and low gain toggle switch. The volume control is beefy and feels and looks great. On the rear of the amp, you will find either the phono input, DAC, USB output, or a sticker covering the area if you opted for no internal upgrades. There is one set of RCA inputs to hook up one component, as well as a set of RCAs for the built-in preamp for powered desktop speakers. Lastly, there is a power toggle switch and a spot for the included power cord. The LYR3 comes with a generous 5-year limited warranty. If balance connections are vital to you, however, you might want to consider this next amp. Let's go over the Jotunheim 2's build and features. Then we will look at the Asgard 3's build and features. Then we can talk about power ratings on all three and how they compare. The Jotunheim 2 is a fully balanced, fully discrete design using Schiit Audio's new, more efficient Continuity S output stage. According to Schiit, it allows for reduced distortion while increasing power output. Like the Ragnarok 2 and the Jotunheim R, the Jotunheim 2 is a Nexus amp. Schiit's unique current feedback inherently differential input-output agnostic topology using match parts throughout. This means, according to the manufacturer, you can use any source, connect to any headphone, powered monitor, or amp without issue. Jason and the Schiit website made a pretty big splash when they said the Jotunheim 2 is the best $2,400 headphone amp for $400. Many shitheads love this, and a few people who own another solid-state amp I reviewed on this channel recently got their feathers ruffled. I think Schiit Audio has always had brilliant marketing with fabulous photography, naming structures, and aesthetically pleasing designs. The descriptive language was just another clever way to draw attention to their new amp and stir up some conversation. Like the LYR3, you can add either a multi-bit DAC, a dual AK4490 DAC module, or a passive phono stage for an additional charge. On the front of the amp, the Jotunheim has 3 toggle switches. The first is for input selection. Toggle up for internal DAC or phono card, middle position is for balance input, and the bottom is for single-ended input. The next toggle switch on the Jotunheim is for high and low gain, followed by the preamp toggle switch. The Jotunheim uses a very smooth, well-performing Alps RK27114 potentiometer, making the volume control a pleasure to use. Last but not least, the Jotunheim has both a 1/4 inch single-ended headphone output and a balanced XLR for those of you that prefer a balanced connection, as well as the increased power from that output, which we will talk about in a minute. On the back of the headphone amplifier, you will find first a USB input for the internal DAC or the phono input if you opted for that instead. If you opt for nothing at the time of purchase, it will be covered for future upgrade use. Next on the back, you have the balance and single-ended inputs, followed by the single-ended pre-outs and the balanced XLR pre-outs. And lastly, the famous Schiit power toggle switch on the back of the unit. The Jotunheim 2 comes with a generous 5-year limited warranty. Last, but definitely not least, the little powerhouse in the group is the mighty Asgard 3. The Asgard uses Schiit's unique continuity topology, extending the benefits of Class A output while still accepting all the same modules, DAC and phono card, as the Jotunheim and the LYR3. On the front of the Asgard, you will first find the volume control, followed by the gain switch, followed by the input switch, and lastly, the headphone output. On the rear of the Asgard, you will find the card input module for the DAC or phono card. Next, you have the RCA inputs, followed by the RCA preamp out, the on-off switch, and the AC input. So let's briefly take a look at the power ratings of all three headphone amps before getting into my sound impressions. As you can see, the LYR3 and the Jotunheim 2 are closely matched for power output ratings. If you need balance or prefer it, the Jotunheim is the obvious choice. If you don't want to use balance, you are not losing much in the way of power with the LYR3 versus the Jotunheim. Lastly, as we saw, the Asgard is the least powerful of the three amps, however it still packs a lot of power under the hood for its price. However, tougher to drive headphones such as the HE6 SE version 2 from HiFiMan wouldn't be a great match for the Asgard in my opinion. I did pair the HiFiMan HE6 SE version 2 headphones with all three of these amps. While the Jotunheim 2 and the LYR3 do have just the minimum amount of power to perform acceptably with the HE6, I would still recommend a more powerful amplifier that also synergizes better with that headphone, such as the Forged Tube amplifier with KT88 power tubes. If this is your first time visiting the channel and you are enjoying this video, please consider subscribing today and smashing the like button for me. I appreciate your support. So now that we talked about the design and the build of these three headphone amps, let's get into the most important part. How do all three of these amps sound? Subjectively speaking, of course. My impressions were made from listening through Roon to a few different playlists, streaming from Qobuz and Tidal, which I will link in the video description. One thing to add, I did upgrade the LYR3 stock tube to a 6SN7 GTB Sylvania black plate for about $50 or $60 as I felt it had the best overall performance and tonality compared to several other tubes I rolled, including the premium stock tube. So to give my sound impressions on each amp and how they compare, I will focus on a few areas: staging, dynamics, detail presentation, tonality, and my overall enjoyment with the headphone amplifiers. Leading off first with how each amp stages, I found the Jotunheim 2 to have good image separation and clarity with a black background. Stage width is average to my ears with okay depth. The amplifier doesn't really have a vast perceived soundstage, but the soundstage wasn't so small that it wasn't enjoyable to listen to. The LYR3 presents good image separation and clarity, not quite as good to my ears as the Jotunheim 2. However, the stage width and depth sound a bit larger than the Jotunheim 2, likely thanks to the holographic nature of the tube. The Asgard 3 again has good image separation, not as much clarity of images to my ears as the other two amps. The background also doesn't sound entirely as black as the other two amps. Again, not a vast perceived soundstage, closer in size to the Jotunheim 2. Talking next about dynamics and how punchy the amps sound, the Jotunheim 2 presents punchy, tight bass hits, and it doesn't sound flabby or loose in any way to my ears. Very nicely done. The LYR3 is not as tight sounding to my ears as the Jotunheim 2 as far as bass hits, and not quite as dynamic overall in its presentation. I still find the amp very enjoyable to listen to, but for those that crave a very dynamic, punchy sound experience, the LYR3 may not be fully up to the task depending on your preferences and headphones. The Asgard 3 presents tight, punchy bass that is right up there with the Jotunheim. I like how dynamic this little amp is for its really reasonable asking price. Next, let's talk about the detail presentation of each of the amplifiers. The Jotunheim 2 has excellent detail presentation of subtle sounds and recordings, aided by its black background. I never felt like I was missing anything on any of my test tracks. The LYR3 again has an excellent detailed presentation of all the subtle sounds on recordings with a black background as well. To my ears, the Jotunheim 2 did seem to present more detail than the LYR3 by a small margin. However, this is a bit closer with a stock premium tube provided with the LYR3. The Asgard 3 is not as good at resolving the finer details on tracks compared to the other two amps. However, it still provides plenty of information, and it also makes for a more relaxed listening experience than the Jotunheim 2. One of the most important areas to me is tonality. The Jotunheim 2 has a neutral, drier tonality without sounding sharp or artificial at times like some of the THX offerings I've heard, especially when listening via the single-ended. The LYR3 to my ears has a reasonably neutral but ever so slightly warmer, more enjoyable tonality than the Jotunheim 2's drier sound, especially when using the Sylvania tube. The Asgard 3 to my ears is the warmest leaning of the 3 amps, with a very natural and forgiving sound signature that many listeners who just want to kick back and listen to music will likely enjoy for hours on end. Lastly, let's talk about my overall enjoyment with each of these 3 amps. I found all 3 amps enjoyable to use with several of the headphones I had on hand. The Jotunheim 2 I felt was enjoyable with the right headphone pairings. I prefer slightly warmer tuned headphones with the Jotunheim, such as the ZMF Aeolus, Rosin Audio Rad0, Focal Radiance, Focal Stellia, and the Sennheiser HD660s. The LYR3 was likely my favorite from an enjoyment standpoint of the 3 amps, as it paired well with so many different headphones. More neutral tuned or warmer tuned headphones seemed to be a good match. I enjoyed the LYR3 paired with a Focal Clear MG, Focal Radiance, Focal Stellia, Rad0, ZMF Aeolus, ZMF Verte, Mezzi Empyrean, DCA Eon 2, Hyphaman Ananda, and the Sennheiser HD660s. I wouldn't pair the LYR3 with brighter headphones for my personal listening preferences though. The Asgard 3 was my second favorite amp overall from an enjoyment listening perspective. The sound signature is slightly more relaxed than the Jotunheim 2, while still having lots of punch for demanding tracks. I enjoyed the Asgard 3 with the ZMF Aeolus, ZMF Verte, Focal Clear, MG, Focal Radiance, Focal Stellia, and the Focal Celesti. For the price, this little amp is really hard to beat. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing and smashing the like button, and visit our website today at mrhifi-reviews.com for more written content. If you think someone would enjoy watching this video, please feel free to share it with them. Until next time, friends, as always, much love.